Do something right now, my dear friend. Find something across the room with your eyes. The hands of a clock. Words on a book spine. The face of someone sitting near you. Is it sharp? Or is there a soft haze around the edges that was not there a few years ago? Most people in that moment do the same thing. They go to an eye doctor. They get a stronger prescription. They buy new glasses. 6 months later, they are back again with an even stronger prescription. And the cycle continues. The vision keeps falling while the lenses keep getting thicker. Here is what almost nobody tells those people. Glasses do not treat your vision. They compensate for the loss. And the real reason vision keeps deteriorating, the biological, cellular reason, has almost nothing to do with the eyes themselves. It has everything to do with what is happening in your blood right now. For 38 years, I watched my patients live past 90, not because of medicine, but because of the way they live. And among everything I observed, one thing struck me more than anything else. People were losing their vision without understanding why. And the reason was not in their eyes. You have probably heard about the connection between diabetes and vision loss. But here is what that conversation almost never includes. You do not need a diabetes diagnosis for blood sugar to be destroying your eyesight. You do not need elevated fasting glucose on a lab report. You need something far more subtle and far more common. You need blood sugar that rises sharply after eating and falls just as sharply. That runs slightly too high for slightly too long. That floods certain tissues with glucose wave after wave while others go hungry. Research suggests this pattern affects the majority of people over 55, and it quietly damages the most metabolically vulnerable tissue in your entire body, your eyes. The retina, the thin layer of light-sensitive cells at the back of the eye, consumes more oxygen and more glucose per unit of mass than any other tissue in the body. More than the brain. It is extraordinarily active, and it is the first to pay the price when glucose supply becomes disrupted. At a standard eye appointment, nobody explains this. The ophthalmologist measures refraction and fits lenses. That is their job. Nobody in that system sits down with you and explains the specific mechanisms by which blood sugar is degrading your vision, and gives you a protocol that addresses each one. That is exactly why I am here, my dear friend. But before we continue, I must name the symptoms that mean you stop watching this video and call a doctor today. Not tomorrow, today. Sudden vision loss in one eye that came on within hours or days. A shadow or curtain moving across your visual field. A sudden flood of new floating spots or threads where there were none before. Flashes of light at the edge of your vision that repeat again and again. Any one of those signs points to acute retinal damage or detachment. These are emergencies. Nothing in this video applies to those situations. You need a same-day ophthalmology evaluation. If none of that applies to you, if what you have is gradual blurring, difficulty reading fine print, halos around lights at night, a general haziness that your glasses no longer fully correct, then stay with me, because what I am about to describe is almost certainly happening in your body right now. Let us begin with the first mechanism, something that happens to nearly everyone with unstable blood sugar, and that almost nobody has ever had properly explained. The lens of the eye, the transparent structure behind the pupil that focuses light onto the retina, is made almost entirely of water and protein. It has no blood vessels. It cannot receive nutrients from circulation the way your organs do. Instead, it absorbs glucose directly from the fluid that surrounds it. When blood sugar rises sharply after a meal, the glucose concentration in that surrounding fluid rises with it. And glucose, entering the lens in excess, is converted by an enzyme inside the lens into a compound called sorbitol. Here is the problem. Sorbitol cannot leave the lens. There is no exit route. It accumulates inside, and because it is osmotically active, meaning it draws water toward itself the way a dry cloth absorbs moisture from a wet surface, the lens physically takes on water and cells. A swollen lens cannot focus light correctly. The focal point shifts. What was sharp becomes soft. Text you could read in good light becomes a blur. This is not a permanent change to the structure of your eye. It is a fluid shift. It is reversible. And it explains something that confuses millions of people. Why vision is noticeably worse on some days than others. Why in the morning, before eating, you see more sharply than the afternoon. Why a prescription from 6 months ago suddenly feels wrong. Your vision is not changing randomly. Your lens is swelling and deflating along with your blood sugar. The second mechanism is slower, more silent, and ultimately more destructive. The retina is fed by the smallest blood vessels in the human body. Capillaries so fine that red blood cells pass through single file. These vessels are the lifeline of your visual system. Without them, the 130 million photoreceptors in the retina that convert light into the signal your brain reads as vision receive no oxygen, no fuel, and no capacity for repair. Chronically elevated blood sugar damages these capillaries through a process called glycation. Glycation is what happens when glucose molecules chemically bond to proteins and fats, deforming their structure and making them stiff. Think of a rubber hose that very slowly turns to ceramic. It loses its flexibility. It becomes brittle. It develops cracks. When the capillaries feeding the retina begin to leak, fluid and blood seep into the surrounding tissue. The retina swells. Visual signals become distorted. This is the beginning of what clinicians call diabetic retinopathy. But the underlying process, capillary glycation, begins years and sometimes decades before any diagnosis is made. You do not need diabetes for this to be happening. You need cumulative glycation exposure, and that is a function of how high your blood sugar runs, how often, and for how long, not whether a number on a lab test has crossed a clinic threshold. The third mechanism targets a different part of the eye, and this one is most directly connected to what you eat. The macula is the small central region of the retina responsible for your sharpest, most detailed vision, reading, recognizing faces, seeing fine print. It is the structure that degenerates in macular degeneration, one of the leading causes of irreversible vision loss in people over 60. The macula contains 2 carotenoid pigments, lutein and zeaxanthin, that serve as its primary defense against oxidative damage. These pigments absorb blue and ultraviolet light before it can reach and damage the delicate photoreceptors underneath. They are the macula's built-in internal filter. Chronic blood sugar dysregulation floods retinal tissue with oxidative stress, an excess of chemically reactive molecules called free radicals that damage cellular structures. Lutein and zeaxanthin are consumed in neutralizing those free radicals. They are depleted fast and the body can replenish them. When the macula's protective pigment runs low, light reaches the photoreceptors unfiltered. Damage accumulates. Visual acuity falls. Most people over 60 are already low in these pigments, simply because their diets are low in dark leafy greens. Add blood sugar dysregulation, and the depletion accelerates significantly. The fourth mechanism connects your vision to something you probably think of as entirely unrelated: your kidneys. The eye and the kidney share an important biological feature. Both are heavily supplied by a particular type of tiny vessel that is uniquely vulnerable to glycation damage. This is why in people with long-standing blood sugar dysregulation, kidney function and retinal function tend to decline together. The same damage mechanism runs in both organs simultaneously. But the connection goes further. When kidney function begins to decline, a cascade follows. Fluid retention increases, blood pressure rises, and the delicate pressure balance inside the eye, called intraocular pressure, is affected. Elevated intraocular pressure is the primary driver of glaucoma, a condition that progressively destroys the optic nerve. Glaucoma produces no pain. It takes peripheral vision first, so slowly that most people do not notice until significant damage has already occurred. The metabolic chain connecting blood sugar dysregulation to microvascular damage, to kidney strain, to elevated intraocular pressure, to optic nerve injury is rarely presented as the single sequence it actually is. Blood sugar comes first. Vision loss follows downstream. Let me tell you about one of my patients. I will call her Yoshiko. She was 71. She lived in my district on Okinawa, led an active life, cooked traditional food, no diabetes. But she came to me twice in 3 years with the same complaint. Her vision was getting worse. Both times she left with a stronger prescription. I noticed early drusen in her chart, small protein deposits under the retina associated with macular degeneration risk, but told there was nothing to do except monitor them. I told her to eat more leafy greens and wear good sunglasses. She did both. Her vision continued to worsen. When I asked her to describe her symptoms in more detail, a pattern emerged. The blurring was worse in the afternoon. In the mornings, before eating, she saw noticeably better. After a heavier dinner with rice and something sweet, the halos around the bedroom lamp became nearly unbearable. After a day of mostly fish, tofu, and vegetables, her vision was measurably clearer. She had not connected those observations, because nobody had told her that her lens was physically swelling after glucose spikes. Nobody had explained that the tiny vessels feeding her retina were being damaged by the same mechanism. Her fasting glucose was 104, not diabetic, not even pre-diabetic by most clinical definitions. A number that generates no intervention at a standard appointment. But her postprandial glucose, the spike after eating, had never been measured. And it is the spike, not the fasting number, that drives the mechanisms we have been discussing. Yoshiko followed the protocol I am about to describe for 4 months. The afternoon blurring reduced within the first 6 weeks. The halos diminished. On her next imaging evaluation, the progression of her drusen had stopped. Not reversed. Damage already done does not do itself. But it stopped. Because the environment creating it had changed. The 5th mechanism is the most immediately correctable. 3 nutrients are specifically critical for retinal health and specifically depleted by the metabolic conditions we have covered. Thiamine, vitamin B1, is essential for glucose metabolism in neurons and in the specialized cells of the retina. When blood sugar is chronically elevated, thiamine is consumed at an accelerated rate, processing the excess glucose load. Research indicates that a significant proportion of people with blood sugar dysregulation are functionally deficient in thiamine, even when a standard blood test looks normal, because tissue demand is outpacing supply. Thiamine deficiency in the retina impairs the ganglion cells that carry visual signals from the eye to the brain. The signal does not disappear, it degrades. Vision becomes less sharp, less contrasty, less crisp, even when the structural eye appears intact on imaging. Magnesium is involved in more than 300 enzymatic reactions, including the mechanisms that regulate blood vessel tone, affect neural tissue from oxidative damage. It is also required for proper insulin signaling, meaning that magnesium deficiency makes blood sugar dysregulation worse, which increases retinal damage, which depletes magnesium further. A loop that runs in one direction, always downward. Clinical research estimates that the majority of people over 60 are insufficient in magnesium, and most have no idea because not included on a standard metabolic panel. Zinc. The retina contains one of the highest concentrations of zinc of any tissue in the human body. Zinc is essential for the visual cycle, the biochemical sequence by which light signals are converted into nerve impulses, and for the enzymes that protect retinal tissue from oxidative damage. Zinc absorption decreases with age, particularly in people whose stomach acid, which is the majority of people over 60. When zinc falls low, the visual cycle runs less efficiently, and the retina's antioxidant defenses at exactly the moment they need to be strongest. 3 nutrients, all depleted by the same metabolic conditions driving the other 4 mechanisms, all punishable through specific, accessible food. Here is the protocol, my dear friend. Morning. Begin the day with a metabolically stable meal before consuming any simple carbohydrate. 2 eggs with a small portion of fatty fish, or full plain yogurt with a tablespoon of ground flaxseed. This is not about eliminating carbohydrates. It is about sequence and timing. A morning meal built on protein and fat blunts the early glucose spike and reduces sorbitol accumulation in the lens that occurs in the 2 hours after eating. The morning glucose response sets the metabolic tone for the rest of the day. Start it flat. Add cooked leafy greens at some point during the morning or early afternoon. Sautéed spinach, cooked kale, braised collard greens, not raw. Heat breaks down the cellular walls that lock lutein and zeaxanthin inside the plant. Half a cup of cooked spinach delivers more bioavailable lutein than 3 cups of raw. Add a teaspoon of oil or a small amount of butter alongside it. Lutein and zeaxanthin are fat-soluble. Without fat in the same meal, they pass through without being absorbed. Daytime. The central daytime practice is managing the postprandial spike, the glucose surge after eating. This requires one rule applied at every meal. Fiber and protein first, starch and sugar last. When you begin a meal with vegetables and protein and save the starchy or sweet foods for the end, glucose enters the bloodstream at roughly half the rate compared to eating in reverse order. This has been documented in multiple clinical studies. The same foods, different sequence, dramatically different blood sugar response. Walk for 10 minutes after your 2 largest meals. Not a workout, a walk around the block. Muscle contraction during and after eating pulls glucose out of the bloodstream directly into muscle tissue without requiring insulin. A 10-minute walk after dinner reduces the postprandial glucose peak by a clinically meaningful amount and is the lowest retinal protective intervention available to anyone. Evening. This is where nutrient replenishment happens. Raw, unsalted pumpkin seeds, a small handful, approximately 30 grams in the late afternoon or with dinner, provide a meaningful dose of both zinc and magnesium in a highly bioavailable form. Not capsules. Food. The minerals arrive in a matrix that the body recognizes and absorbs efficiently. Herring, regular salted herring from any grocery store, provides thiamine alongside vitamin D and the omega-3 fatty acids that reduce systemic inflammation and directly support the structural integrity of retinal cell membranes. 2 or 3 servings a week. Egg yolks, 2 per day. Egg yolks contain lutein and zeaxanthin in the most bioavailable form of any food. More bioavailable than dark leafy greens, more bioavailable than supplements, because fat already present in the yolk ensures full absorption. Concerns about egg yolks and cholesterol have been substantially revised in the clinical literature over the past decade. The more relevant fact for this conversation is that the egg yolk is the single most efficient lutein delivery vehicle available at an ordinary grocery store. Before bed, one practice only. Stop eating at least 2.5 hours before sleep. The last food day should be finished well before your head reaches the pillow. Eating close to sleep drives a glucose rise during the first hours of the night, precisely when Retina is supposed to be undergoing its primary repair cycle. The photoreceptors that worked all day rebuilding their light-sensitive outer segments do this repair during deep sleep. A blood spike during that window competes with the repair process. Give the retina its recovery window, giving the digestive system its rest window. 2 observations you can make immediately without any equipment. First, the time of day test. Pay attention to whether your blurring follows a pattern. Worse 30 to 90 minutes after eating, particularly after starchy or sweet meals, and noticeably better in the morning before breakfast. That is the lens swelling pattern. That is blood sugar driving, not irreversible structural disease. Second, the 7-day food journal. For 1 week, write down what you ate and note your vision quality 1 hour later. Not in detail, just clear or blurry, better or worse than this morning. Most people who do this for 7 days see a pattern their eye doctor never told them to look for, because eye doctors do not ask what you had for lunch. How old are you? Write it in the comments, my dear friend. I want to know who is watching, because the timeline of these mechanisms, how quickly glycation damage accumulates, how fast lutein and zeaxanthin are depleted, how significantly zinc and magnesium absorption falls, shifts with each decade past 55. Age helps me shape what this channel covers next. 5 steps for tonight. 1. At your next meal, eat the vegetables and protein first. Put the bread, rice or sweet item last. 2. Walk for 10 minutes after dinner. Not tomorrow, tonight. 3. Buy raw, unsalted pumpkin seeds tomorrow. Start with a handful in the afternoon. 4. Add 2 egg yolks to tomorrow's breakfast. 5. Set a hard stop on eating 2.5 hours before you plan to sleep. Start that tonight. The prescription you keep updating is not the answer. The answer is changing the metabolic environment that is causing the deterioration in the first place. Your retina is not failing because you are getting older. It is failing because it is being bathed in a chemical environment that is slowly damaging the finest blood vessels and the most energy-intensive tissue in your body. That environment can be changed. Not with a procedure, not with a medication. With the sequence of your meals. A handful of seeds, 2 egg yolks, and 10 minutes of walking after dinner. For 38 years, I watched bodies heal when the conditions healing were restored. I saw it in my patients on Okinawa. I see it everywhere people make these small, consistent changes. Your eye is not the problem, my dear friend. They are the report. Now you know how to read it.